There is a quiet unease that many people carry in their hearts, a sense that something is always slightly off, that life does not quite match our expectations. Even when things appear to be going well, career success, relationships, health, security, there often lingers a subtle dissatisfaction. A quiet voice whispers, "Is this it?" Or perhaps more urgently, "Why does happiness slip away so quickly?" We grasp at joy, yet it fades. We avoid pain, yet it finds us. No matter how clever, rich, talented, or spiritually inclined we may be. This basic struggle continues. This deep discomfort is not a personal failure, nor is it merely an accident of circumstance. According to the teachings of the Buddha, this unease is woven into the very fabric of our lives because we do not see clearly. We look at the world through the lens of desire, fear, memory, opinion, habit. We chase what pleases us, avoid what disturbs us, and build narratives to make sense of it all. But what if the root of our suffering is not in what happens to us, but in how we perceive what happens? What if the most radical act of freedom is not to change our circumstances, but to change how we see? This is the entry point of right view, Sammā-Diṭṭhi in the Pāli language, the very first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. The Buddha placed it at the beginning for a reason. Without right view, we walk the spiritual path blindly. Right view is not just one element among many, it is the compass that gives direction to all the others. If we misunderstand reality, then our intentions, speech, actions, meditation, and even our sense of morality can become distorted. We may think we are progressing when in fact we are simply reinforcing our delusions. Thus, right view is not optional, it is essential. But what does it mean to see clearly? And more importantly, what are we seeing clearly into? The Buddha's invitation was radical, not because it offered new beliefs to adopt, but because it urged us to look into our experience without bias, without grasping, without illusion. This is not an academic exercise. It is a direct and transformative encounter with the living flow of impermanence, suffering, and non-self. The Buddha's teachings are not meant to make us feel safe or comfortable. They are meant to awaken us. In today's spiritual world, where the word mindfulness has become popularized and commodified, it is easy to forget that the original goal of the Buddha's path was not relaxation, self-esteem, or stress management. It was liberation. And liberation begins with truth. Not abstract truth, not religious dogma, but the truth of how things are in this very moment, in the body, in the mind, in relationships, in birth and death. Right view is the clear seeing that burns away illusion like the sun dispels mist. It is not something we believe in, it is something we see. In the Sammā-Diṭṭhi Sutta, the Venerable Sariputta, one of the Buddha's chief disciples, explains right view in depth. He begins not with philosophy, but with the understanding of skillful and unskillful actions, of the laws of karma, of the Four Noble Truths. This suggests that right view is not only an insight to be discovered in meditation, it is also a wisdom we cultivate through ethical reflection and lived experience. In other words, we begin to see clearly when we begin to live wisely. However, right view is not easy, because it requires us to let go of cherished identities. It asks us to question the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what the world owes us. It invites us to notice how we resist the present moment, how we impose our preferences on life, how we react to discomfort as if it should not be there. To see life as it is means to drop the illusion that life is supposed to conform to our will. This is not a passive fatalism. It is an active, awakened presence that meets reality with clarity and compassion. We often believe that we are rational, that our views are shaped by facts. But in truth, most of our views are shaped by past conditioning, unconscious fears, and hidden desires. Right view exposes this. It calls us to look beneath the surface of every moment and ask, am I seeing clearly? Or am I projecting my hopes, my judgments, my wounds onto this situation? To live with right view is to live with this inquiry alive in our hearts. And so, this lecture begins not with answers, but with questions. Can we learn to see without grasping? Can we observe without defending? Can we meet life without asking it to be different? Can we surrender our fantasies in favor of truth? These questions are not abstract. They are the very ground of liberation. To understand right view is to understand suffering and its end. It is to walk with open eyes, even when what we see is painful. It is to bow to impermanence instead of resisting it. It is to hold ourselves and others with compassion because we understand that everyone is caught in a web of views they mistake for truth. And above all, it is to realize that freedom does not lie in controlling life, but in seeing life as it is, raw, immediate, and ever-changing. Let us begin, then, this journey into right view. Not as a doctrine to memorize, but as a light to walk by. Not as an escape from suffering, but as a direct path into the heart of it. For only when we see with wisdom can we live with peace. When the Buddha spoke of right view, he was not pointing to a fixed belief system, nor was he asking his disciples to adopt a particular doctrine on faith. Rather, he was inviting them to see for themselves, to develop a clear, unclouded perception of the way things truly are. Right view is the gateway to the entire path of awakening, because it shifts our foundation from confusion to wisdom. It is the difference between building a house on sand and building it on solid rock. With right view, all the steps that follow intention, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration are rooted in truth. To understand what right view truly means, we must first acknowledge that it operates on two levels, the mundane and the supermundane. This distinction, found in early Buddhist texts, is crucial. At the mundane level, right view refers to understanding the moral fabric of the universe. That actions have consequences, that wholesome actions lead to well-being, and unwholesome actions lead to suffering. At this level, right view means having confidence in the law of karma, recognizing that our choices matter, that we are not victims of chance, and that the ethical quality of our intentions shapes our experience. But the mundane level is only the beginning. The Buddha also spoke of a higher, supermundane right view, a deep, direct understanding of the Four Noble Truths. This is the right view of the awakened mind. It is not based on faith or reasoning, but on direct insight into the nature of suffering, its origin, its cessation, and the path leading to its cessation. It is the moment when the veil drops and reality is seen nakedly, without distortion. Both levels of right view are important. The first stabilizes our ethical life. The second transforms our very being. But what they share is a quality of seeing clearly. This clarity is not intellectual. It is not about having the right opinion. It is about perceiving without distortion. In a world where most of us look through the lenses of craving, fear, projection, and habit, right view is a radical act of honesty. It is looking at a flower and seeing a flower, not a symbol of beauty, not a memory of loss, not a thing to possess, but simply what it is, in this moment. Before concept. The Buddha compared this kind of seeing to the clearing of a forest path. At first, the way is overgrown, tangled, impossible to navigate. But as one begins to cut through the brush, the path slowly reveals itself. This is the work of right view. It is not a belief to adopt, but a process of uncovering, unlearning the filters that obscure our vision. Every time we pause and question our assumptions, every time we step back from reactivity and observe with mindful attention, we are training in right view. A helpful analogy is the act of cleaning a mirror. Imagine trying to see your reflection in a mirror covered in dust and stains. The image you see is not accurate. You might try to change your clothes or adjust your hair, but nothing changes the fact that the reflection is distorted. The only way to see clearly is to clean the mirror. In the same way, right view is the cleansing of perception. It is removing the dust of ignorance, the smudges of attachment and aversion, the fingerprints of identity. Only then can we see clearly who we are and what reality truly is. Right view is also deeply relational. It influences not just how we see ourselves, but how we see others. Without it, we fall into patterns of blame, judgment, idealization, or fear. We turn people into objects, means to an end, sources of validation, enemies, or saviors. But with right view, we begin to see others as fellow travelers on a path of struggle and awakening. We recognize that just like us, they want to be happy and free from pain. We understand that behind every harmful action is confusion. This insight is not sentimental, it is grounded in wisdom, and it gives birth to compassion. It is important to remember that right view is not static. It is not something we attain once and for all. It deepens over time as our practice matures. In the beginning, right view may mean simply recognizing that harmful actions lead to suffering. Later, it may deepen into the insight that there is no solid self to own those actions. Still later, it may blossom into the direct realization of emptiness and the cessation of grasping. Each stage of understanding builds upon the last, like climbing a mountain and seeing further with each step. There is also a danger we must be aware of, the danger of turning right view into a weapon. When we begin to see more clearly, we may be tempted to judge others for their ignorance. We may feel spiritually superior or intellectually righteous. But this is itself a form of wrong view, because it clings to a fixed identity. I am the one who sees, and they are blind. True right view is always accompanied by humility. It knows that perception is a living process, that wisdom is not possession, and that even insight must be held lightly. The moment we cling to a view, even a right one, we lose the freedom that comes with open seeing. Right view is not meant to give us answers, but to help us ask better questions. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" we ask, "What is happening right now without my interpretation?" Instead of, "How can I get what I want?" we ask, "What is arising from wanting? And what happens when I don't feed it?" These are questions of wisdom. They shift us from a self-centered narrative to a dharma-centered inquiry. And with time, they bring us to the threshold of liberation, not because we have found something new, but because we have dropped what was never true. Right view, then, is not a destination. It is a way of traveling. It is the lamp we carry through the forest of life. It does not guarantee that the road will be easy or that suffering will vanish overnight, but it ensures that we are not walking in circles. It protects us from delusion and points us toward freedom. As the Buddha said, just as the dawn is the forerunner of the sun, so right view is the forerunner of the noble path. May we learn to see, not with the eyes of desire, but with the heart of truth. May we walk this path not to escape life, but to see it fully, honestly, and without illusion. If right view is the clear perception of reality, then what obstructs it? Why don't we naturally see life as it truly is? The answer lies in the filters of the mind, subtle yet powerful distortions that shape how we perceive every moment. These filters are not external. They are not imposed on us by others. They arise from within our own minds, often unconsciously, and they are so familiar that we rarely even notice them. Yet they govern our reactions, cloud our clarity, and lock us into cycles of suffering. The Buddha identified 3 fundamental defilements that lie at the heart of these distortions: craving, aversion, and ignorance. These 3 forces don't just affect what we do, they influence how we see. They create a warped lens through which we interpret the world, ourselves, and others. To cultivate right view, we must become aware of these forces and begin to understand how they operate in our direct experience. Craving, or ta, is the tendency of the mind to reach out, to grasp, to seek, to attach. It manifests as wanting pleasure, wanting security, wanting identity, wanting certainty. Under the influence of craving, we don't see things as they are. We see them as potential sources of satisfaction. We project value onto objects, people, and experiences, hoping they will complete us or fulfill our longing. But when we chase what we crave, we stop seeing clearly. The present moment becomes merely a stepping stone towards some imagined future, and our vision becomes narrowed, distorted by our hunger. This distortion is not only limited to material things. We crave attention, love, validation, even spiritual experiences. A meditator might sit hoping to achieve peace or bliss, and in doing so, miss the simplicity of the breath. A person might enter a relationship hoping to find completion, and in doing so, fail to truly see the other person. Craving bends our perception around our desires. It colors reality with the illusion of, if only I had this, if only they were different, if only I could control that. The mind lives in a constant state of dissatisfaction, not because life is insufficient, but because we are seeing it through the lens of lack. Then comes aversion, or paiga, the second major distortion. If craving pulls us toward what we want, aversion pushes us away from what we don't want. It is the reactive force of resistance, the inner recoil from pain, discomfort, fear, and anything unpleasant. Aversion is not just hatred, it includes irritation, impatience, anxiety, denial, suppression. When aversion is present, we are not seeing the object of our discomfort clearly. Instead, we are trying to eliminate it, reject it, or pretend it's not there. Our vision becomes clouded by resistance. We see this in meditation when restlessness arises and we want to end the session. We see it in conflict when someone criticizes us and we instantly defend ourselves or attack back. We see it in grief, when we cannot accept the impermanence of those we love. Aversion makes us tighten, contract, and build emotional armor. But this very reaction blinds us to what's actually happening. The more we resist life, the more life feels hostile. And in this self-created war, right view cannot survive. But underneath both craving and aversion lies the most pervasive distortion of all, ignorance, or avidya. This is not a lack of information, it is a lack of wisdom. It is not that we don't know facts, it is that we don't see the truths of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. Ignorance is the fundamental not knowing that gives rise to all other defilements. It's the root of delusion, the reason we continue to cling, react, and suffer. As long as ignorance is present, our view of reality will be partial, fragmented, and false. Ignorance manifests in many ways. We believe that things will last, even though everything is impermanent. We believe that we can find lasting satisfaction in transient experiences. We believe that there is a solid I at the center of our experience. Even though the Buddha taught that the self is a convenient fiction, a process, not a person. These beliefs are not intellectual errors, they are habitual misperceptions. And because they are so deeply ingrained, we rarely question them. They shape our view like tinted glasses we've worn for so long we've forgotten they're there. To begin freeing ourselves from these distortions, we must cultivate a different kind of seeing. This doesn't mean forcing ourselves to think right thoughts or adopt Buddhist ideas. It means learning to observe the movements of craving, aversion, and ignorance as they arise in the moment. When we notice the urge to grasp, we can pause and investigate. What am I hoping to gain? Is this really going to bring peace? When we feel the sting of resistance, we can soften into it and ask, what am I trying to avoid? Can I simply allow this discomfort to be here? And when we catch ourselves lost in views and stories, we can ask, is this perception based on truth or on habit? This practice of inquiry, gentle, honest, and direct, is the heart of right view. Over time, we begin to peel back the layers of distortion. We catch ourselves in the act of projecting, assuming, judging, and reacting. We begin to see how suffering arises not from what happens, but from how we interpret what happens. In this space of seeing, freedom begins to emerge. There is another powerful set of distortions described in the Buddha's teachings, known as the four perversions of perception vipallasa. These are seeing the impermanent as permanent, seeing the unsatisfactory as satisfactory, seeing the non-self as self, seeing the impure as pure. These four distortions summarize the deep misseeing that binds us to suffering. They are not just philosophical errors. They are woven into how we relate to everything: our bodies, our relationships, our goals, our self-image. To bring right view to life, we must confront these habits of mind, not with shame or force, but with awareness and compassion. Only through this patient, courageous seeing can we begin to reverse the perversions and glimpse the world as it truly is. This is not a quick or easy process. It takes humility to admit that we are not seeing clearly. It takes mindfulness to catch our projections before they turn into actions. It takes courage to face discomfort without running. But this is the work of the Dharma, the sacred labor of waking up. Every moment we choose to observe rather than react, to investigate rather than assume, to see rather than seek, we are removing the filters that distort reality. And with each layer removed, the light of right view shines more brightly. Right view is not about being right. It is about being free. And freedom begins the moment we stop believing every story the mind tells and start looking directly at our breath, our thoughts, our reactions, and this ever-changing, ever-teaching reality. At the very heart of right view lies a profound understanding that has the power to transform not just how we think, but how we live and how we suffer. This understanding is encapsulated in the Buddha's first and most fundamental teaching, the Four Noble Truths. These truths are not merely philosophical ideas or religious tenets to believe in. They are a practical map of reality, a diagnostic and prescriptive framework for liberation. To see life clearly through the lens of right view is to see it through the direct insight into these four truths. It is to stop fleeing from suffering, to stop chasing illusions, and instead to turn inward and observe the dynamics of existence with honesty and precision. The first noble truth is simple, direct, and yet often misunderstood. There is dukkha. Dukkha is commonly translated as suffering, but its meaning is broader and deeper. It refers to the fundamental unsatisfactoriness that pervades all conditioned experience. This does not mean that life is only suffering or that joy is an illusion. It means that all phenomena we cling to as sources of stability, pleasure, possessions, relationships, identities are inherently unstable and therefore ultimately unreliable. Everything that arises is subject to change, and whatever changes cannot be depended upon to provide lasting happiness. Dukkha is the deep unease that arises from living in a world of flux while seeking permanence. It is the existential tension between our craving for stability and the reality of impermanence. To truly see this first truth is not to become pessimistic, it is to become real. It is to stop expecting life to behave according to our desires and to begin observing how those very expectations generate our distress. Right view recognizes that suffering is not a personal curse or a mistake in the system. It is the natural result of misunderstanding the nature of reality. We suffer not because life is broken, but because our perception is clouded. The first noble truth invites us to drop the illusion that we are entitled to a life free from discomfort and instead to investigate our experience with courageous attention. It is not about resignation, but revelation. The second noble truth points directly to the origin of suffering, craving or ta. This craving takes many forms: desire for pleasure, desire for existence, desire for non-existence. It is the thirst that arises from ignorance and fuels the cycle of becoming. Craving is the inner engine of dukkha. It drives us to grasp at fleeting experiences, to resist change, to construct identities, and to build entire worlds of hope and fear. But what's crucial in the context of right view is this: the Buddha is not merely blaming craving, he is showing it. He is inviting us to observe how, in the moment of suffering, craving is always present. Whether it's the ache of loneliness, the sting of loss, the burn of anger, behind it all lies a wanting things to be different, wanting something we don't have, wanting to escape what we cannot face. Right view sees this with clarity and compassion. It doesn't condemn craving, it understands it. It notices how craving hijacks perception, turning neutral events into threats or promises, how it narrows our view until we see only what we want or fear. This is not just theoretical. In meditation, when we sit quietly and observe the mind, we begin to notice how craving rises and falls like a wave. We see how it distorts attention, how it whispers, grasps, insists. And with this seeing, a new kind of space opens up, a space of choice, of freedom. We realize that we are not helplessly bound to our desires. We can watch them, understand them, and let them pass. The third noble truth is perhaps the most revolutionary. The cessation of suffering is possible. Nirodha is not some utopian fantasy. It is the natural result of seeing clearly and releasing attachment. When craving ceases, suffering ceases. When we no longer identify with what arises and passes, we rest in the peace of non-grasping. This truth offers hope, but not in the form of future promise. It offers hope as present potential. Nirodha is not something we must earn or manufacture. It is something we uncover, something always available beneath the noise of wanting and resisting. Right view recognizes this cessation not as a mystical state, but as a moment-to-moment possibility. Every time we choose awareness over reactivity, every time we let go instead of clinging, every time we stay with what is instead of fleeing to what might be, we taste a little freedom. We taste Nirodha. The mind that sees clearly does not need to fix everything. It does not need to possess or control, it simply abides. And in that abiding, peace is no longer a goal, but a resting place. The fourth noble truth is the path itself, the noble eightfold path, of which right view is the first and foundational step. This path is not a ladder to climb, but a circle to live. It includes ethical conduct, mental discipline, and wisdom. It is a way of walking in the world that aligns our actions, speech, and thoughts with the reality we now begin to see. When right view is established, the rest of the path flows naturally. We no longer act out of ignorance. We no longer speak from delusion. We no longer meditate with the agenda of ego. Each step reinforces the others, and the whole path becomes a spiral of deepening understanding. But what is vital to remember is this: the Four Noble Truths are not beliefs, they are lenses. They are the framework through which right view perceives reality. Without them, our perception is fragmented. We may see some truths, but miss the deeper patterns. We may recognize impermanence, but not the craving that causes us to suffer from it. We may understand the mind, but not the path to its liberation. With the Four Noble Truths, everything becomes coherent. suffering is understood. Its cause is seen, its end is realized, and the way becomes clear. To cultivate right view is to live with these truths alive in our awareness, not recited like doctrine, but observed like breathing. When something pleasurable arises, we remember its impermanence. When discomfort surfaces, we investigate the craving beneath it. When peace emerges, we honor it, not by clinging to it, but by letting it deepen through non-grasping. In every moment, the Four Noble Truths are available, not as philosophy, but as practice. The Buddha said that just as the footprint of an elephant is the largest of all animals and can contain the footprints of every other, so too the Four Noble Truths contain all the teachings. They are not one teaching among many. They are the key to the whole path. And when we align our view with them, we begin to live not in confusion, but in wisdom. We stop reacting blindly and start responding mindfully. We stop demanding that life fulfill our fantasies and start meeting life as it is, with clarity, compassion, and courage. This is the heart of right view. It is not about escaping life, but about penetrating it. It is not about becoming something more. It is about seeing what we are and what we are not. It begins and ends with truth. And the Four Noble Truths are the truth that sets us free, not because we believe them, but because we see them, here and now, in this very breath. One of the essential aspects of right view, often overlooked or misunderstood in modern interpretations, is the understanding of karma. In its original Pāli context, karma does not refer to fate, punishment, or cosmic reward systems. It refers quite precisely to intention, the volitional force behind our actions. Sattva-bhikkhave kamavadami, the Buddha declared, "It is volition, monks, that I call karma." This understanding radically shifts the conversation from superstition to responsibility. Karma is not what happens to you. It is how you choose to respond. Karma is not stored somewhere in the universe. It is imprinted in the habits of your own mind and heart. To hold right view is to see this clearly. It is to recognize that our actions, physical, verbal, and mental, have consequences, not because of some divine judgment, but because of the natural law of cause and effect. When we act from greed, hatred, or delusion, we strengthen those patterns in our consciousness. When we act from generosity, compassion, and wisdom, we nourish those qualities within ourselves. Our experience of the world is shaped not merely by external events, but by the internal momentum of how we relate to those events. Karma is not about blame. It is about momentum. And right view sees this momentum with clarity. When something painful happens to us, the mind often wants to find someone to fault, ourselves, others, God, fate. But right view challenges this tendency by asking a different question, not whose fault is this, but what is the cause and what is the result? It doesn't search for a villain, it investigates conditions. For example, if someone speaks to us harshly, we might habitually react with anger or withdrawal. But with right view, we pause and observe, what is arising in me right now? What intention is forming? What action will this intention lead to? In that moment of awareness, we are no longer trapped in a chain of reactivity. We are participating consciously in the unfolding of karma. This shift from blame to observation is liberating. It empowers us to take ownership without self-condemnation. It allows us to understand our patterns without drowning in guilt. Karma under right view is not a moral scoreboard. It is a living map of transformation. Every thought, word, and deed either reinforces delusion or opens the path to awakening. Right view trains us to pay attention to that choice again and again. Importantly, right view also teaches us to extend this wisdom to others. When we see someone caught in anger or fear, we do not need to label them as bad or toxic. We can instead see the causes and conditions that have shaped their karma. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it does invite compassion. It reminds us that no one is inherently evil. People act out of ignorance, pain, and conditioning. And just as we can transform our patterns, so can they. This vision dissolves judgment and replaces it with understanding. It brings an end to the rigid narrative of enemy and victim and opens the space for forgiveness and healing. Furthermore, the law of karma is intimately tied to mindfulness. Because karma begins with intention, and intention often arises before we are even conscious of it. The practice of mindfulness is what allows us to catch karma at its root. In daily life, our minds are often so fast-moving, so reactive, that intentions become actions before we even realize what has happened. But with right view and mindfulness together, we can begin to slow this process down. We can notice the seed before it becomes a tree. We can see irritation before it becomes harsh speech. We can see craving before it becomes grasping. We can see fear before it becomes escape. This seeing is the first step in transforming our karma. In the broader context, understanding karma through right view also means recognizing the role of habitual tendencies, what the Buddha called sakras. These are the mental formations, the accumulated patterns that shape our responses. We inherit them not only from this life, but from many lives past, according to Buddhist cosmology, but whether or not one accepts literal rebirth. The point remains, our present moment experiences are deeply conditioned, but not predetermined. Karma is not destiny, it is possibility, and right view keeps that possibility alive. In practical terms, this means that even the smallest act of kindness matters. A single moment of awareness can interrupt years of conditioning. A moment of restraint, of silence, of reflection, these are powerful karmic turning points. The mind that sees this is a mind that lives consciously. It no longer runs on autopilot. It no longer feels like a victim of the world. It recognizes that freedom begins not with controlling others or changing circumstances, but with mastering our own responses. Right view also frees us from the illusion of randomness. In a world that often appears chaotic and cruel, it is tempting to fall into despair or cynicism. But the Buddha's teaching on karma offers a different perspective. It says, what you do matters. Even if no one sees it, even if it brings no immediate reward, every wholesome intention nourishes the seeds of awakening. There is justice in the universe, not imposed from above, but arising naturally from the law of cause and effect. This is not dogma, it is what we can observe for ourselves if we look deeply and patiently. Ultimately, right view and karma are inseparable. Right view sees that every moment is a karmic crossroad. It sees that our liberation is not in some distant future, but in how we respond to this breath, this thought, this interaction. And it sees that the path of awakening is not paved with grand gestures, but with countless small, clear, conscious steps. When we truly understand karma, we realize that we are never powerless. We are never trapped. We are never defined by our past. Every moment of awareness is a new beginning. This is the power of right view. It gives us back our dignity. It shows us that we are the authors of our own unfolding, not because we control everything, but because we are responsible for how we meet what life brings. And in that responsibility lies the seed of freedom. Right view is not an abstract philosophy reserved for scholars or monks. It is a living wisdom that must be applied in the raw, messy, unpredictable conditions of daily life. It is not enough to understand right view intellectually. We must live it, embody it, let it shape our responses to the world moment by moment. The true test of our view is not in what we say we believe, but in how we meet irritation, desire, fear, and uncertainty. Right view is not something we hold. It is something we practice. And that practice begins wherever we are, right now, with whatever life is offering. The foundation of cultivating right view in daily life is observation without judgment. We are conditioned to immediately react to what we experience, to label things as good or bad, right or wrong, pleasant or unpleasant. But the moment we assign a label, we stop seeing. We overlay our expectations and memories onto the moment, and the reality itself becomes obscured. Right view calls for a different approach, not to judge, but to observe, to see clearly. We must look without adding anything. This means watching a thought arise without believing it, noticing a feeling without resisting it, and experiencing a situation without imposing a narrative. One of the most powerful tools for cultivating right view is mindfulness, sati in Pāli. Mindfulness is the attentive awareness of what is happening in the present moment, free from distraction, reaction, or commentary. With mindfulness, we begin to notice how the mind constantly filters reality through craving, aversion, and ignorance. We catch ourselves in the act of projecting, assuming, fearing, and in that moment of seeing, we loosen the grip of delusion. For example, in a conversation, we might notice the rising urge to interrupt or defend ourselves. Rather than following that impulse, we pause. We breathe. We ask, what is driving this reaction? Is this coming from clarity or from ego? That pause is the seed of right view. Daily life provides countless opportunities to practice this. When we feel frustration at traffic, can we observe the impatience instead of becoming it? When we feel desire arise in the presence of something beautiful or tempting, Can we recognize the movement of wanting without being pulled by it? When someone behaves unkindly, can we see their action as a result of their own conditioning, rather than reacting with judgment or self-righteousness? Right view is not about suppressing emotion. It is about seeing through it. Not to deny what arises, but to understand it deeply, and in that understanding, to be free from its control. Another way to cultivate right view is through yoniso manasikara, wise attention. This means directing our attention skillfully with the right questions. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" we can ask, "What is arising now? What is the nature of this experience? Is it permanent? Is it truly satisfying? Is it self?" These questions are not meant to produce answers, but to pierce illusion. They break the spell of identification. When we apply wise attention to a painful emotion, we begin to see that the pain is not as solid as it first appeared. We see that it changes, that it arises and passes, and most importantly, that it is not self. This shift in perspective is the heart of right view. It is also helpful to reflect regularly on the characteristics of existence, impermanence, anicca, unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, and non-self, anatta. These are not ideas to memorize, but lenses to see through. Every time we notice that something we clung to has changed, we are remembering impermanence. Every time we realize that pleasure doesn't last, we are seeing unsatisfactoriness. Every time we catch ourselves taking something personally and realize it is just a mental formation, we are glimpsing non-self. These are not esoteric truths. They are everywhere. But we must train the heart and mind to recognize them. Equally important is letting go of fixed identities. So much of our suffering comes from clinging to ideas like, "I am this kind of person. I must succeed. I need to be respected," or "I can't fail." These identities are mental constructions, useful perhaps for navigating the world, but ultimately empty. Right view invites us to question them. Who is the I that is angry? Who is the self that is offended? When we look deeply, we find only processes, thoughts, feelings, memories, habits. The illusion of a solid self begins to dissolve. And as it does, we become more fluid, more open, more free. Cultivating right view is not limited to formal meditation. It must enter every aspect of life, our work, our relationships, our decisions. In conversation, we can listen not only to words, but to the underlying tone. Are we seeking approval? Are we hiding behind politeness? Are we speaking from fear or from clarity? In moments of joy, we can be present without grasping. In moments of sorrow, we can feel fully without collapsing. Even in routine activities, washing dishes, walking, answering emails, we can train ourselves to stay present, to observe without reacting, to return again and again to seeing clearly. None of this requires special conditions. In fact, ordinary life is the perfect training ground. The Buddha did not teach escape from the world. He taught awakening within it. We don't need to become monastics or isolate ourselves. We need only to commit to looking honestly. And in that commitment, daily life becomes the path. The crying child, the rude customer, the unexpected traffic jam, all of it becomes material for wisdom. Every irritation is a doorway to patience. Every disappointment is a mirror for craving. Every success is a test of attachment. With right view, nothing is wasted. Ultimately, cultivating right view in daily life means living with eyes wide open. It means no longer being swept away by appearances, no longer imprisoned by expectations. It means seeing the impermanence in what is pleasant, the emptiness in what is painful, and the freedom in letting go. It means training the mind to return again and again to what is actually here, instead of chasing what is not. And in doing so, we begin to taste a different kind of peace, not the peace of control or avoidance, but the peace of understanding. Right view does not promise a life free of difficulty, but it does promise a life rooted in truth. It offers us a way to walk through the world without illusion, to feel deeply without drowning, to live fully without clinging. It is the path of clarity, courage, and compassion, and it begins right where you are, with this moment, this breath, and the willingness to see. Right view is the first step on the noble Eightfold path, but it is not merely a beginning to be left behind as we move forward. It is the ground from which every other factor arises, and the thread that weaves through the entire tapestry of the path. Without right view, the other steps, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, Right mindfulness and right concentration lose their direction. They may still be practiced, but without clarity, they risk becoming hollow rituals or expressions of confusion. When right view is present, however, the path becomes not just a set of practices, but a living process of inner alignment with reality. Right view gives rise to right intention. When we see the world clearly, see suffering, see the cause of suffering, see the possibility of its cessation, we naturally begin to orient ourselves differently. Our intentions shift from self-centered striving to wholesome motivation. The intentions of renunciation, goodwill, and harmlessness arise not from morality imposed from outside, but from wisdom within. We no longer act merely to get what we want or to protect what we fear losing. Instead, our intentions reflect our insight that grasping brings suffering, that hatred poisons the heart, and that clinging to delusion leads us further from peace. With right view, intention becomes an expression of understanding, not just of effort. That clarity of intention then informs right speech. When we truly see the consequences of our words, how they plant seeds in the minds of others, how they either build connection or deepen separation, we speak differently. Right speech is not just about avoiding lies or harshness. It is about embodying awareness and compassion in our communication. With right view, we begin to notice the subtle motivations behind our speech. Are we speaking to impress? To manipulate? To defend a fragile sense of self? Or are we speaking from a place of honesty, kindness, and relevance? Right view makes us more sensitive to the ethical weight of every sentence. It transforms language from a tool of self-protection to a practice of truth and care. In the same way, right view empowers right action. It is easy to follow rules and feel moral, but the Dharma asks for more than that. It asks for awareness of cause and effect. When we see clearly that harming others ultimately leads to inner unrest, we choose differently. We begin to live with the understanding that ethical behavior is not about appearances or approval. It is about harmony, within and without. Right action becomes not a moral obligation, but a natural response to clear seeing. We do not kill, steal, or exploit, not because we fear punishment, but because we understand interdependence. We see that to harm another is to deepen the illusion of separation and to block the heart's capacity for peace. From there, right livelihood arises as the broader application of ethics to our way of being in the world. With right view, we begin to examine not just what we do, but how we earn our living and what kind of energy we contribute to society. Is our work aligned with the principles of compassion and non-harming? Does it support awakening? Or does it perpetuate craving, distraction, or ignorance? Right view calls us to responsibility, not as a burden, but as a path of integrity. When our livelihood reflects our deepest values, it becomes an extension of the path, a field for generosity, service, and inner development. Right view also illuminates the inner disciplines of practice, beginning with right effort. Often misunderstood as mere striving or intensity, right effort in the light of right view becomes wise energy. It is the careful cultivation of wholesome states and the abandonment of unwholesome ones. It is not driven by perfectionism or ambition, but guided by discernment. With right view, we learn to direct our effort not against ourselves, but toward clarity, kindness, and steadiness. We begin to understand the difference between pushing and planting. We do not force ourselves to awaken. We cultivate the conditions in which awakening can arise. This shift transforms practice from struggle into trust. Right effort, in turn, supports right mindfulness. Mindfulness is not passive awareness. It is precise, balanced, and informed by wisdom. It is the quality of attention that sees things as they are, not as we wish them to be. But this seeing must be guided by right view, or else mindfulness can be hijacked by ego or used to reinforce delusion. For example, we might become mindful in order to perform better, control pain, or appear spiritual. These goals are not wrong, but they are limited. Right view brings mindfulness back to its purpose, the direct observation of reality, leading to the cessation of suffering. It helps us to see impermanence in each breath, craving in each reaction, and emptiness in each self-image. Mindfulness becomes not just a tool, but a mirror of wisdom. Finally, right concentration, the cultivation of meditative absorption or jhana, is profoundly shaped by right view. Without clarity, concentration can become escapism. One might seek deep states of tranquility as refuge from discomfort, rather than as tools for insight. But with right view, Concentration is understood as a stabilizing force, a sharpening of the mind in service of liberation. The calm and joy that arise in meditative absorption are not clung to. They are seen as conditioned, impermanent, and supportive of deeper insight. The concentrated mind becomes a vessel for seeing more clearly into the nature of experience. And in this clarity, the roots of suffering are gradually uprooted. What becomes evident is that each factor of the path reflects and reinforces the others, and that right view is the guiding light throughout. It is not the starting point to be checked off and forgotten. It is the compass by which we navigate the whole journey. And as we live the path, our view continues to evolve. The clarity we have today may be partial, and that is fine. Right view is not perfection, it is direction. Even a glimpse of truth is powerful. Even a moment of clear seeing can shift the course of a lifetime. The Eightfold Path is often depicted as a circle, not a straight line. This is to remind us that awakening is not linear. We cycle through these factors again and again, each time with greater depth, each time with more refinement. And in every cycle, right view becomes a little clearer, a little steadier, a little more rooted in direct experience rather than borrowed belief. It is like walking a spiral staircase in the dark, where each step teaches us not only where we are but how we see. Ultimately, the Eightfold Path is a path of freedom, not freedom from the world, but freedom in the world. And right view is the wisdom that makes such freedom possible. It frees us from confusion, from projection, from the tyranny of our own assumptions. It invites us to walk not by opinion, not by reaction, but by truth. And as we do, the path unfolds not as a doctrine to follow, but as a way of living that is intelligent, compassionate, and awake. If right view is the path to clarity, liberation, and truth, then wrong view, Mikkadaihi, is the root of confusion, bondage, and suffering. In the Buddha's teachings, wrong view is not just a philosophical mistake. It is a deeply embedded distortion in how we perceive the world and ourselves. It's not limited to incorrect opinions about metaphysics or theology. Wrong view manifests in every moment we see permanence where there is impermanence, self where there is no self, satisfaction where there is only fleeting sensation. To overcome wrong view, then, is not to win an argument, it is to see through illusion. And that requires not just knowledge, but humility. The Buddha did not teach by asserting dogma. He taught by pointing directly to experience. Yet even so, he warned repeatedly about the dangers of clinging to views. He identified certain wrong views as particularly obstructive, such as the belief that actions have no consequences, that the self is eternal and unchanging, that pleasure can bring lasting happiness, or that liberation can be found through external rituals alone. But perhaps even more dangerous than these specific views is the tendency to become attached to any view at all. The grasping mind turns even the Dharma into identity, turns understanding into pride. This is why overcoming wrong view is not merely a matter of replacing one set of ideas with another. It is about uprooting the very habit of identification with views. One of the most powerful tools for this work is humility. Not the false humility of self-deprecation, but the deep humility of not knowing. The willingness to look again. The courage to admit that what we see may not be the whole picture. The Buddha praised those who asked questions, who investigated, who did not blindly follow teachers or traditions. And he warned of the arrogance that arises when we cling to certainty. Even the most refined spiritual view can become a hindrance if we hold it tightly. Even insight can become a trap if it becomes a possession. This humility is not weakness. It is strength born of wisdom. When we recognize how easily the mind can deceive itself, we become more careful, more gentle, more curious. We stop rushing to conclusions and start listening more deeply to others, to our experience, to the quiet voice of reality. We begin to see how wrong view often arises not from malice, but from fear, from the need to feel secure, special, or in control. The self clings to views as a way to assert its existence. But the more we cling, the more we suffer. Right view arises not through argument, but through surrender. Overcoming wrong view also requires us to see its effects. Wrong view leads to unskillful actions, to rigid beliefs, to interpersonal conflict, and to inner turmoil. When we observe our own mind caught in judgment, blame, superiority, or despair, we can ask, what view is behind this? What story am I believing right now? This question alone can loosen the grip of delusion. It turns the light of awareness inward, where transformation truly happens. The Buddha taught that there are two extremes we must avoid: eternalism, the belief that there is a permanent, unchanging self or soul, and nihilism, the belief that nothing matters, that there is no karma, no meaning, no possibility of liberation. Both are wrong views because both miss the middle way. Eternalism clings to identity. Nihilism collapses into despair. Right view, by contrast, sees process, sees interdependence, sees cause and effect. It sees the unfolding of experience not as a personal drama, but as a lawful arising of conditions. And in that seeing, the burden of me begins to dissolve. But the mind resists this dissolution. It wants ground. It wants control. It wants certainty. And so it creates views about the self, about others, about the world. We form stories and call them truth. We grasp onto opinions and call them reality. Overcoming wrong view means seeing this process, not once, but again and again. It means noticing how we defend our views, how we build identity around them, how we resist any challenge to them. It means staying open when the mind wants to shut down. Humility in this context also means being willing to learn from experience, from suffering, from silence. It means being willing to not have the last word. In meditation, we might see a deep insight arise, but instead of proclaiming it, we simply bow to it. We watch how even insight fades, how the mind tries to cling, how ego reappears in new costumes. With humility, we don't try to freeze awakening into a formula. We let the process continue unfolding. We trust that truth is not something to grasp, but something to participate in. This attitude of humility also changes how we relate to others. When we no longer assume that our view is the only view, we become more compassionate. We stop needing to convert, convince, or condemn. We start to listen, not just to words, but to the human heart behind them. Even those who hold deeply deluded views are, in some way, searching for peace. When we remember that, our response softens. We speak truth, but without aggression. We stand firm, but without superiority. We teach, if we must, not to win, but to serve. The Dharma is not a weapon. It is a light. The more we cultivate this humility, the more space we make for genuine insight. When the cup is empty, it can be filled. When the mind is quiet, wisdom can arise. Overcoming wrong view is not a single victory. It is a lifelong practice of letting go. Again and again, we release the stories, the opinions, the identities. We return to direct experience. We trust what can be known through presence, not through ideology. And slowly, the fog begins to lift. Right view is not a belief, it is a seeing. But that seeing must be cultivated in an environment of honesty, patience, and humility. Without humility, even the truth becomes distorted. With humility, even confusion becomes a teacher. The path of overcoming wrong view is not about acquiring more. It is about shedding what is false. Not about becoming better. It is about becoming free. And in that freedom, we find a new kind of confidence, not the confidence of certainty, but the confidence of clarity. A mind no longer bound by opinion. A heart no longer caught in defense. A being no longer clinging to self. This is the humility that liberates. There is a quiet revolution that takes place in the heart of one who begins to see things as they truly are. Not as we wish them to be, not as we fear they might be, and not as we've been taught to believe, but simply as they are, changing, contingent, not self. This seeing is not dramatic. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. It slips in softly, like the morning light after a long night. Yet in that simplicity lies a power beyond anything we can measure or describe, the power to liberate the mind from suffering. To see things as they are is to pierce through the veil of appearance. It is to stop mistaking the surface for the substance. All our lives, we have been conditioned to believe in permanence, in control, in identity. We look at a beautiful face and see youth, not the inevitability of age. We fall in love and imagine forever, not the natural rise and fall of emotions. We experience success and feel secure, forgetting that fortune is as unstable as a breeze. When right view dawns, we don't become indifferent to these things. We simply stop being fooled by them. We stop asking impermanence to give us permanence. We stop expecting what is conditioned to behave unconditionally. And in that moment, we begin to breathe differently. Liberation does not come from escaping the world, but from seeing it clearly. The Buddha never promised to change the world to suit our desires. He offered a way to free the mind within the conditions of this world. When we begin to see that every experience is in constant motion, that nothing solid or lasting can be found, our clinging starts to weaken. This doesn't mean we become cold or detached. It means we become wise. We enjoy without grasping. We love without possessing. We grieve without collapsing. We live without illusion. This seeing is radical. It is not something our habitual mind welcomes easily. The ego thrives on continuity. It builds its identity out of stories, labels, and memories. It says, I am this kind of person. I always react this way. This belongs to me. That happened to me. But when we look closer, none of these constructs hold up. They are mental impressions, arising and fading, with no core to anchor them. Right view invites us to look again. Where is the self in this moment? Is it in the body, which ages and changes? In the thoughts, which flicker like fireflies? In the emotions, which rise and fall like tides? When we see with honesty, the self begins to dissolve, not into nihilism, but into spaciousness. To see things as there is also to see the nature of suffering. Not to turn away from it, not to distract ourselves, but to turn toward it with open eyes. This is one of the most courageous acts a human being can perform. We are taught to avoid pain, to fix it, numb it, blame someone for it. But the Buddha taught a different path, to understand it. When suffering arises, we investigate it. We don't ask, why me? But what is this? We look for its causes, its conditions, its impermanence. And in that seeing, we begin to unravel the knot of identification. The pain may remain, but the sense of, I am this pain loosens. We start to feel space even within discomfort. The power of this seeing is cumulative. One small moment of clarity plants a seed. One moment of observing the breath without clinging, one moment of letting go of a thought. One moment of kindness instead of defensiveness, all of it adds up. The mind begins to shift. The default settings of reactivity weaken. The grooves of grasping become shallower. And slowly, suffering becomes optional. Not because life becomes easy, but because the mind is no longer deceived. This transformation is not about belief. It's not about adopting the right doctrine or joining the right group. It's about looking, again and again, with patience and courage. Looking without conclusion. Looking without trying to fix. Just seeing. The way a flower opens to sunlight, the way water finds its own level, clarity arises when conditions are ripe. Our job is not to force it, but to prepare the ground, to cultivate the silence in which truth can speak. What we find, when we truly see, is that peace is not something we gain. It's something we uncover. It's been there all along, hidden beneath the layers of craving, fear, and identification. When the mind stops grasping, stops resisting, stops constructing, what remains is ease. This ease is not fragile. It is not dependent on things going our way. It is not the peace of having what we want, but the peace of no longer needing to have. It is the profound contentment of alignment with truth. In this clarity, even death loses its terror. We see that what we took to be self is a flow of conditions. There is no solid entity to preserve, no permanent soul to be threatened. There is only the dance of arising and ceasing. This is not bleak. It is liberating. It means that fear is based on a misunderstanding. And when that misunderstanding ends, so does fear. We can live fully, love freely, give generously, because we are no longer clinging to a phantom self that must be defended. The liberating power of seeing things as there is not distant or mystical. It is immediate. It is in the breath you are taking now. It is in the sound you are hearing. It is in the thought that just arose and passed. The truth is not hidden. It is obscured by the noise of wanting. When the noise quiets, the truth shines, not as an idea, but as a direct experience. And once seen, even briefly, it leaves a mark. It changes how we live. We begin to walk more lightly, to listen more deeply, to speak more truthfully. We begin to act not from fear or habit, but from awareness. And this is what the Buddha meant by liberation, not an escape, not a reward, but a way of being that is grounded in reality, not illusion. A freedom that comes not from changing the world, but from seeing it clearly. This is the gift of right view. This is its power. It asks nothing from us but honesty. And in return, it offers everything. As we reach the conclusion of this long journey into right view, it becomes clear that this first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path is not merely an entry point. It is the foundation, the compass, and the sustaining force behind the entire path to awakening. Every step we take, every meditation we practice, Every precept we follow, every insight we gain, rests upon the strength and clarity of our view. Without right view, we are like a traveler lost in the forest, following a map upside down, thinking we are moving forward when in fact we may be walking in circles. With right view, even the most difficult terrain becomes navigable. Even suffering becomes a teacher. Even uncertainty becomes a doorway to deeper wisdom. The Buddha once said that just as the dawn is the forerunner of the rising sun, right view is the forerunner of all wholesome states. In other words, when the mind begins to see clearly, all other aspects of the path follow naturally. Ethics become a way of protecting clarity. Concentration becomes a way of deepening it. Wisdom becomes the fruit of it. And liberation becomes the natural outcome of a life lived in alignment with truth. But what does it mean to live with right view? Not just to understand it, but to embody it. It means that in each moment, we meet experience with curiosity instead of judgment, with presence instead of projection, with humility instead of pride. It means that we let go of the frantic search for control and begin to trust the simplicity of cause and effect. It means that we stop clinging to stories about who we are, who others are, and what life owes us, and instead begin to observe the flow of conditions arising and ceasing without ownership. We start to see that suffering is not a punishment, but a signal. Craving is not a sin, but a habit. The self is not a fixed entity, but a convenient fiction. And all things pleasant, painful, beautiful, terrifying are fleeting, empty, and not self. This seeing is not cold or detached. It does not turn us into robots or spectators. On the contrary, right view allows us to engage with life more fully. Because we are no longer blinded by illusion, we can love more freely, speak more honestly, serve more selflessly. Compassion becomes deeper, not because we feel obligated, but because we understand that others are caught in the same illusions we are. We recognize our shared vulnerability, our shared longing for peace. We act not from superiority, but from solidarity. Right view also brings resilience. When things fall apart, we do not collapse. We remember, this too is impermanent. This too is not me. This too is a wave in the ocean of experience. We stop needing life to be different in order to be okay. We stop being shaken by praise or blame, gain or loss, success or failure. Not because we are indifferent, but because we are anchored. Anchored in a vision of reality that is honest, flexible, and wise. And yet, right view is not something we achieve once and for all. It is something we return to again and again, deepening each time. It is a lens we must constantly clean, because the dust of habit and culture and emotion gathers quickly. Even long-time practitioners can be caught by subtle forms of wrong view, attachment to identity, spiritual pride, fixed notions about awakening. That is why humility is so essential. We must always be willing to look again, to ask ourselves, am I seeing clearly, or am I seeing through the lens of fear, craving, or assumption? Right view is alive. It grows with our practice, matures with our insight, and becomes more luminous as we let go. In the early texts, the Buddha often emphasized Sammā-Diṭṭhi, right view, as both the beginning and the fulfillment of the path. This is because awakening is not a place we arrive at, but a way of seeing that becomes so steady, so unwavering, that delusion can no longer take hold. The awakened one still walks, still eats, still speaks, but with a mind that no longer clings. Why? Because they see. They see things as they are. And in that seeing, the chain of craving, clinging, and becoming is broken. The fire of reactivity is extinguished. The struggle ends. That is nibbana, not a place, not an escape, but the peace that comes from knowing directly that nothing needs to be grasped. This path is available to all of us. We do not need to become monks or scholars. We do not need to retreat from the world. We only need to become curious, to become honest, to become willing to look. And when we do, when we start to see the impermanence in a moment of joy, the craving behind a moment of irritation, the emptiness within a fixed opinion, we are already on the path. We are already walking toward freedom. Right view is not a possession. It is not a conclusion. It is a way of relating to experience that is grounded, open, and kind. It protects us from self-deception. It shields us from despair. It illuminates the path when we are lost. And it humbles us when we are too sure. Above all, it reminds us that the deepest truths are not far away. They are here, in this body, this breath, this moment, if only we are willing to see. So let us walk with right view, not as believers, but as explorers. Let us cultivate it not to become special, but to become sane. Let us protect it not as an ideology, but as a lamp in the darkness. And let us remember, liberation does not come from running away. It comes from seeing, from knowing, and from resting in the simplicity of what has always been true. This is the gift of the Buddha's path. Not salvation from above, not comfort from outside, but freedom born of seeing clearly. And it begins, always, with right view.